Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rembach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we're going to have a really good discussion on really how we need to keep things simple and how they can help us navigate our way through the complex. Because we have Tom Schmitt on the show today. Tom, welcome. Now, Tom, when you actually talk about Tom and he's asked where he is from, he tells them the Deep South, which is true, just not in the traditional American sense. Tom and his brother grew up in a small town in the Deep South of Germany. His parents taught him and his brother 2 important lessons that have directly contributed to who he is today and how he leads as a CEO. The importance of strong values and having confidence in oneself. Without these ideas instilled in his mind, Tom would have never left Germany to become CEO of a $2 billion premium expedited ground transportation company focused on the U.S. market. Before moving to the U.S., Tom began his education at the University of Heidelberg, hoping to become a teacher, but he stumbled upon international business. This was when he realized that he could obtain 2 degrees at 2 separate universities in different countries, allowing him to experience living in different countries. And this path led him to receive his Bachelor of Arts in European Business Administration from Middle Essex University. While there, he had the opportunity to intern for British Petroleum Company, where he was offered a job at the end of his internship. After a year into his career at BP, he rose to managing multiple BP gas stations across Cleveland, Ohio, with more than 100 employees, winning Best in District several times. Later, he held senior roles at McKinsey & Company before spending 12 years at FedEx in Memphis, where he served as CEO of FedEx Supply Chain and SVP of FedEx Solutions. Then he served as President, CEO, and Director of Purelator, Canada's top parcel and freight transportation company. And from 2013 until 2015, he was president, CEO, and director of Aquaterra. In 2015, he served as management board member and chief commercial officer at DB Schenker. Is it Schenker?
Schenker.
Thank you very much, sir. A $20 billion global logistics company before moving to his current role as chairman, president, and chief executive officer of Forward Air. He's also a published co-author of Simple Solutions, a leadership book published by Wiley & Sons. The book lays out simple and pragmatic tools to draw on both the analytical side and the more creative side of our brain. Currently leading Forward Air from Atlanta, Georgia, Tom is particularly proud of the support Forward Air provides military veteran drivers. Forward's charitable arm supports the company's efforts in building a workforce that benefits veterans in ways that their competition does not. Tom has also led Forward to achieve record revenue while increasing driver pay, which has helped promote their low driver turnover rate, which is considerably lower than their competitors, which is at 90%. Tom currently lives in Atlanta with his wife, Anita. Tom Schmitt, thank you for joining the show and helping us all get over the hump.
Jim, great to be with you.
Now, I've had the opportunity to go through a couple of the frameworks that you have in the book, and it does seem very simple, but we all know that we have very complex decisions that we need to make. So you actually talk about harnessing the power, and if you think about it from a pillar's perspective, and this is where the balance also comes in. You talk about tools and passion. What are some of the simple tools we need to leverage?
Yeah, let me actually, Jim, if you allow me, let me go back a little bit because I think it's interesting certainly for me in my development and hopefully for your listeners also to see a little bit of the background here. So as you just said, I was born and raised in the deep south of Germany. Most of us, we kind of grow up with one of our brain halves being more dominant. The left-hand side is more analytical. The right-hand side is more feeling, sensing, more passion. And I grew up, and you read some of my resume as a kind of a very analytical type person. I was always fascinated with math. And a lot of what informed me in my development was very left brain, very analytical, very kind of rational, somewhat nerdy. And so what I was fortunate to experience when I was in Memphis was I had a big brand name of FedEx behind me. And when you're in a town like Memphis and you're part of FedEx and you roll up your sleeves, you get engaged, you can do a lot together with other people, having an impact on the city. And I got to know some of the leaders also in non-business spaces. The founder of Ballet Memphis became a very good friend of mine. The lady who led Shelby Farms Park, the largest urban park in North America, became a good friend. These people lead very differently from the way I lead when they lead the ballet in Memphis or the park. And that's when I started figuring out you can actually get from A to B on the shortest, most linear route, like using your left brain half, or you can get there perhaps smelling the roses, long and winding road, and the outcome may be more beautiful, maybe perhaps more passion influenced. And that's when this whole concept to me kind of started clicking. Hey, you can actually, if you can figure out, yes, I realize I'm at home naturally in the left-hand side of my brain, and I can figure out how I tap into the other half too, it actually gets me to a point where hopefully I'll have more fun and I'll have more impact because I use 100% versus just 50% predominantly. And that's when you talked about tools and passion, all in this simple concept where it's basically a scale where what we share in this book, my co-author and I, is 10 fairly simple ideas. 5 of them are on the left-hand side of the brain, more drawing on analytical type tool sets. And the other 5 are more on the right-hand side of the brain, drawing more on passion, intuition, sense, feeling and sensing things. And that's the background. And again, the idea is like, hey, find a way that you can dominate with what your typical kind of natural half is, but also access the other half. It just frankly makes for a better time and you'll be more successful at what you do.
Well, as you're saying that, I even start thinking about if we look at the dynamic nature of an organization, you could possibly even start breaking it down and saying, okay, what percentage of people do I have which are dominant on one side versus another side? And then also looking for the diversity in that, right?
That's a great point. And I mean, here's so our company, Forward Air, is 4 decades old. And so until a year and a half ago, the entire leadership team over the entire 4-decade history of that company looked exactly, Jim, like you and me, without the German accent. And but they're all middle-aged white male. And so it's hard to say that, yeah, middle-aged white males are more analytical and perhaps other people that look different are not. But what we have learned, the same principle here is, I said, let's tap into 100% of the brain by tapping into left-hand side and right-hand side. Same is true with organizations. Let's tap into 100% of the talent pool. And discussions become better, outcomes become better when you tap into the full talent pool. And because then you get people who are more intuitive, you get people who are more kind of science-based, you get a blend of all these things, and it just becomes better. So I'm very proud to know now that in our 7-people leadership team, 2 of those 7 at least no longer look like you and me, and they make for a better combination of a discussion and better outcomes than what we had before.
Well, okay, so we talk about looks, and I don't know, I don't want to necessarily put too much weight in the look piece, because what you're saying to me is like we need to look inside, right? So I even talk about this when we start talking about diversity. Sometimes I think often, especially in today's world, oftentimes we immediately go to color. But that's, we could have, and this is the example that I like to talk about, is we could have 5 of those middle-aged white men, but they all have dramatic differences from one another. So I talk about difference management. So in other words, I could have one of those guys who's a divorcee, has kids, I could have another one of those that's part of the, LGBTQ plus community. I could have another one, that is taking care of elderly parents. I could have another. So I think we need to stop and say what's inside, because that's really the most important piece. It's not what we see as outside as a cover.
I think it's a completely fair point. Like diversity, yeah, from an external perspective, it's making sure that you recognize that there's different ethnicities and different genders and different age groups and all that going on. But I think your point is 100% spot on. It's about experiences that the group collectively and people individually bring to the table, and those have to be diverse. That informs a richer discussion, and that makes for better outcomes.
Most definitely. Okay, so I do, and so there's obviously, to me, I think it's a 1+1. If you started looking at tools and passion equals not just 3. We're probably talking about 10x benefit when we start combining these things, right? But if I look at the tools, the way that you talked about the scale, and you actually have a graphic that's in the book, on this tool side, it talks about management savvy, people skills, collaboration, time management, and then execution. So let's focus a little bit on these tools for a moment. Now, you have these in this graphic, stacked in a certain way, but I would dare to say that that's probably not in a hierarchical order, or is it?
That is correct. I find sometimes one or two of them more impactful, perhaps than other ones. At the same time, I think each one of them has their place. If I take the first one, like the management savvy, right? This is a lot of people saying work smarter, not harder. I've always found the simple best question that I can ask, like when you look for remarkable step change outcomes, is what would have to be true for us to grow by 3x? What would have to be true for us to be having 0 incorrect paychecks? And because here's a discussion that without mentioning names or throwing people under the bus. So when I was at FedEx in Memphis, one of the areas when I was leading the solutions organization was sales compensation. And sales is a bit of a different animal than most of the rest of the organization, where the risk reward profile tends to be somewhat different. You're always on showtime. Your results are fairly easily recognizable. You mentioned when I led the gas stations at BP in Cleveland, when we walked into the district office, there was always the list of the 7 of us who had different parts of the greater Cleveland area, and we were always ranked. And the number 1 guy was Mr. Wonderful, and the last person was Mr. Miserable. And every single person who walked into that district office saw your name somewhere on that list, and you never ever wanted to be Mr. Miserable, right? So there's something about ranking. Salespeople are in that space where they get ranked all the time. Back to Salesforce compensation. So that was part of my domain, and there's monthly Salesforce incentive compensation checks. And a third of those checks were actually incorrect, and they always had to be corrected the following month. Imagine you get a paycheck and you have odds of 1 out of 3 that they're actually incorrect. That causes, when it comes to people's compensation, they rightfully are very sensitive. That causes a lot of issues. So then we looked at the management business objectives for the following year. And then the VP in charge of that area recommended to me, okay, I've got as one of my objectives, reduce the incorrect checks by 10%. I said, what? So now we're going from 33% incorrect checks to 30% incorrect checks? That can't be true. So the question you should be asking, and that's tool number 1 on that scale, what would have to be true for every single Salesforce compensation check to be accurate? What would have to be true for that to be the case? Take a pen, let's have a discussion, and let's write down what system-wise, process-wise, resource-wise, checking and balance, what would have to be true for every single one of them to be issued correctly? Well, it's impossible. Well, can we just humor me. Let's write these things down, right? And you get to very, very different outcomes when you ask the question that way. Not how can I grow Mexico by 10%, but what would have to be true for Mexico to be 3x as relevant tomorrow as it is today? And this is, again, one of those very, very simple tools that are more analytical. I mean, this is not black or white, but they're more analytical than they are passion or intuition based. And you basically go to work, you write these things down, and then you get to step change remarkable outcomes.
Well, as you were saying that, and you and I'm going to bring it up because you kind of hit on a point that from a discussion that I had with Oded Netzer, who's a professor at Columbia, on his book Decision Over Decimals, when we were talking about what you were referring to, which is divergent and convergent thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And us being able to separate out the two. And so when somebody does come to us, that they don't start shooting these things down. Okay, what would it take for it to be true? I mean, remove all the barriers, remove all your biases, remove all what we currently have now, right? Let's just blow it. Let's just blow it up and blow it out. And let's just focus in on that. And then so when we dedicate the proper time and effort and get the right minds involved and diversity involved, we'll have zero errors.
That's exactly right. Let me just take another one that's so simple and compelling. And by the way, the book, and I'm not looking to hike book sales. It's 15 years old, and I'm very fortunate and lucky that I got the chance to actually co-author it. But one of the other tools is you mentioned time management. Again, this is one of those very, very simple, compelling things so what I did, and I actually had it done for my entire solutions organization, which wasn't huge, but it was about 700 people. I had people fill out timesheets, which was, as you can imagine, was hugely popular, right? Like Big Brother's watching me now, like he wants to know kind of like how I spend. I don't care whether you work 45 hours or 38 or what I do need to know is that I did this for myself too. In like 7 or 8 buckets of kind of administrative things, commercial area. And so if we had a goal, as an example, to increase our international business, and that goal was like 25% of kind of in the weighting of all of our objectives for the following year. And then if I look at myself and I look at the whole team, and when we look at these time cards, we spent 2% on international business, but it's 25% of the objective kind of space for us as a company, then that's clearly not aligned, right? When you have mind share and energy and time being completely out of sync with the proportionality of the importance of the topic, right? So that's where time management comes in. And again, this is all about making sure that mind share and energy are aligned with the things that matter most. And that's, again, one of those other simple tools that's on that left-hand side, the analytical side of that scale.
Well, as you're saying that, I start thinking too about oftentimes a trap that we could fall into. And that is, if you look at all the research studies, it tells us that what we need to be able to do is take the things that we're good at and try to actually make those even better, because that's where we're going to receive our greatest level of gain. But unfortunately, just through our conditioning in regards to the education process and things like that, unfortunately, we start focusing in on things that we're not good at. And so the incremental gains when we do that are much, much smaller, and it sucks away from the things that we're good at. So how are you addressing that issue to say, okay, well, yeah, this is a business objective. However, let's look at what we're good at and then making sure all of that aligns as well.
I think it's exactly, Jim, what you're talking about. It's about creating that space for that discussion. So it is probably natural when you have, like, you get scorecards. Oh, this one's red. Let's do, how can we overturn the redness and make this less pathetic? Versus, but again, it's us as leaders stepping up and forcing that discussion, looking at what's actually very green. We're actually at 120% of target in, let's take an example, growing our international business. Well, what would have to be true for us to accentuate that greenness, make it twice as green, right? And 200%, 300. One, it's actually frankly more fun to make a wild success story even more successful. And to your point, it creates more energy. Momentum is already there. You just basically try to actually amplify that momentum. versus getting something that's barely kind of crawling to get to some form of walking stage, right? It takes a lot of energy, and the incremental gains of increasing that momentum of something that already works may be significantly higher than trying to turn something around that's barely crawling into something that's barely walking.
Well, when I start thinking that if you look at I was introduced to using the word ecosystem many years ago from a really influential and impactful mind that I had the opportunity to interview on the show, is, how do I, as a leader within an organization, and you can even take this all the way down to the frontline level. I mean, it's at all levels it applies. How do I address that particular issue to know when I need to not put as much effort and energy into something, and maybe even allow a colleague to take over? So if we always will use the analogy about, a seat on the bus. Well, it's really about finding the right seat on the bus, right? So how do you go about that determination to be able to say, you know what, here's where we need to cut and run. Here's where we need to, actually, maybe even reallocate some of those resources over here to put it over here. And how do you go through that process?
Yeah, I mean, there's something about size of impact and the ease of getting to that impact. And I'm a big fan of 2x2s. So, I mean, this is a good one where you have basically size of impact is one axis, ease of getting that impact is the other axis. And then the northeastern quadrant of the four quadrants is like there's significant impact and it's relatively easy to get there, right? And that's the type of area where you just need to be all over, right? And then you need to also make sure, to your point about leaders and reassigning something, that here's another 2x2 will skill matrix, right? You need to put a person in charge of leading, going after this high impact, fairly easy to go after prize, who actually is ideally superbly willing and superbly skilled to go after that. And if he or she, who's in charge of that, is very, very skilled to do that, but has done it 7 times before, I need to recognize that and roll up my sleeves and say, I need to be the biggest cheerleader for her to do it one more time, right? Do one more for the giver. Or if she's like tremendously willing to go after that high impact prize, but she hasn't really done it before, and some of the tools may not be there, that's when it's time for me to be teacher. I need to roll up my sleeves, sit down with her, and just walk through some of that together so that I basically train and educate and teach her to do that. One thing, Jim, that's also interesting. So when you find this area that's super high impact that we need to get more resources into, and then you actually put a leader into place to lead that area who is low in will and low in skill towards achieving that particular task. You know what we just did? We just committed leadership failure, because that's actually on us. If you put somebody in place for that to be led, who's low-willed and low-skilled to do so, it's wrong on every single dimension. We're going to screw up the organization because it's going to be a failure. We're also potentially wrecking the career, or at least the trajectory of that person, by putting her into a position to actually fail. That's leadership failure. We just screwed up. So, but this is where there's a good power of, again, simple tools of 2x2s, where both in terms of size of prize and ease to get there, will and skill of the leader that we're putting in charge to get there. We have to be always very conscious. This is where my left brain side of being somewhat analytical comes in. Very conscious who we are putting in charge to lead what. Is it a high prize area that we're actually going after to begin with? And are we putting someone in place who actually is really set up for success because she's willing and she's skilled to do that? And if she's not one of the two, I need to recognize either to teach her, or I need to recognize to cheerlead her so that she does it one more time.
Well, as you're talking, I start thinking of the monumental shifts that we've been going through. We talked about the impacts that you were able to achieve through going through the COVID crisis and logistic crisis, and arguably, I think it's still in play in a lot of different ways, right? But we've also had a massive shift in the workforce. Some people decided to do other things. They've decided to, it's a whole slew of different factors. So when I start thinking about leading an organization of mass size, what is your worry in regards to finding people that have both will and skill?
Yeah, I think, let me just, and you mentioned a few things, Jim, I want to make sure we take advantage of in that conversation. So the last several years, none of us, I would say, were savvy enough to predict the black swan event called COVID. Also, I think all of us would say we didn't really appreciate its arrival. Now, having said all of that, I think this getting to your point, we all should be embracing some of the things that we actually learned over the last 2 or 3 years. So let's make sure we soak those up, we bottle those, and one of them is the flexibility, right? So so I happen to be in the office today. I'm not every day. And so we can actually be very effective, very differently. And so this whole notion of working from home, will we be working from home 5 days a week? Most of us probably will not. But I think just the simple fact that flexibility is real and we should take advantage of that, I think is tremendous. I think that's something we definitely should be remembering and not forgetting. Another one is the word empathy. Empathy was probably not a top 10 vocabulary type word in the business environment until 3 years ago. We as a company now, Forward Air, when we came up with our 10 leadership imperatives for these times and the times to come, we lead with empathy is one of those 10. Like when one of our businesses, we're in the high value freight business. We want to be the best when it matters most. We want to be the best in moving stuff that's bigger than a box. That's including delivering and installing high value appliances. So sometimes I see emails where we delivered and installed a Sub-Zero fridge in somebody's home. When we left, the kitchen floor was scratched up. Now, fortunately, we are the best at what we do. We just got the Home Depot Appliance Carrier of the Year award last year, but we're not perfect. We're always in pursuit of perfection. We're never going to get there. So then I look at this email trail where customer is irate. We just literally scratched up their kitchen floor, which may be brand new. And then I see the email following the complaint explaining why our team did the exact right thing. And that's where I feel like perhaps we actually even did. Perhaps for some magical reason, it was not even our fault. But why the hell would we not start with I'm so sorry for what just happened here. This sucks. If this were my kitchen floor, I'd be upset like crazy, as are you. And then you go to work, right? Then you okay, let's problem solve this. What can we do about this, right? But you don't start there, right? You lead with empathy, like this really sucks. And that's also something I think over the last 2 or 3 years, I think in our ecosystem, as you just said, Jim, we picked up more that it's perfectly fine. In fact, it actually is helpful if you acknowledge how something made people feel. And because I think we got as a society rightfully more sensitive over the last several years over many things. And I think acknowledging that should become part of who we are.
Most definitely. Well, that's a good segue into getting into the whole passion component, right? All right. So we hit on the management savvy, people skills, collaboration, time management, execution as far as the tools, balancing that with ambition, leadership, vision, focus, and determination. Again, I don't think that's stack ranked in a certain order, but if you can kind of give us a little bit of insight into the passion.
Yeah. So let me just take one. That's ambition. I think most of us in the business world, and frankly in most other spaces, ambition has a very good role to play. But I think it's important to understand you can be ambitious in more than one way. The first thing is you can be ambitious for yourself. And let me take an example. You mentioned McKinsey as part of my professional development. I was there for 1 year in Vienna, Austria, and for 5 years actually here in Atlanta. For me, coming too forward there was kind of coming home to Atlanta because I spent the mid-90s here. And I was, to be very blunt about it, I was ambitious for the wrong thing at the time. My first goal was, okay, so how long does it take typically to become a project manager, not just an associate on a project? Oh, it takes 3 years or so. Well, I want to be the fastest, like I want to be project manager in 2 years. So I was hugely ambitious for myself. And I think some of the actions that I like, you behave accordingly, right? So like, how do I position myself well? How do I get recognition? And it just gets a lot of momentum going the wrong way. Imagine if you generally find a way to be ambitious for remarkable outcomes. Like, we want to make sure that this client project is the wildest success story that this client has ever had. And that's where I'm focusing my ambition towards. Or I could even say, like, there's this junior colleague on this team. I want to be ambitious for him to grow tremendously in this process and leave this project so much better as a leader, as a business person than he was 6 months earlier. What I found out, and it took me a little bit of feedback and also reflection, what I found out, when you find a way to be ambitious for remarkable outcomes for others, for the project team, it'll come back to you. The positive recognition that ultimately you will get from that is it's going to come back to you. It's going to find you. And I think you don't do yourself and everybody else a favor. Be ambitious for those wonderful, remarkable outcomes. It pays off in spades, and it may not be linear. It may not be one for one. It comes back to you. And so I think this is also on that right-hand side, the passion side. Like, it's great to be ambitious. Be ambitious for the right thing.
Well, that goes into like what you were saying, is the expectation component, the talking about the values, in talking about that work that you put in. I'm sure it wasn't a situation where you just picked words out of a dictionary. I mean, I'm sure that was a long, arduous process that took a lot of, team involvement and different perspectives and all of that. That's not something quick that you go through. And also talking about, it's funny things, we talk about elevating up to the next level. And people talk about a glass ceiling. The reality is technical competency gets us to a certain point. So in other words, those tools and that side of the brain will get us up to a certain point of status and responsibility and position in a hierarchical type of organization. But then it has to flip, and the passion has to get strong. and if you can't make that flip, you're going to hit a glass ceiling, right? So, even when you start talking about these things on the passion side and talking about the determination, keeping people's eyes focused on what they should be ambitious about, I would dare to say you're probably having that discussion more than you're having discussions about the tools.
It's a great point. And Jim, to be very blunt about it, in that entire process of team sport and tag teaming, writing this book, I actually never thought about it sequentially or in terms of in your professional development, that the left-hand side perhaps comes first and gets you to a certain place, and then you need to somehow rev up the right-hand side to get to like next S-curve or so. It probably actually is correct. And for me, it was that way, right? I was an analyst. I was managing gas stations, and so very left brain. And at some point, I looked left and right, and I picked up some different ways of getting to remarkable outcomes. And then I somehow found a way to also be home in that right-hand side. It wasn't natural to me, but again, with leaders that I surrounded myself, I found ways to pick up from that. So, which by the way gets me to another point, which is a bit more on the right-hand side. You can argue that there's an analytical component of that. When you put your leadership team together, this gets to your point about diversity. I was striving so hard at FedEx when I put my solutions leadership team together, is that my next 3 lieutenants, in something that was remarkably important for the success of the organization, each one of them, I wanted to be better than I was in an area that really, really mattered. One guy was actually, hard to believe, more analytical than I was. And actually, I learned like different dimensions from just working with him. One person actually was much more kind of better in interacting with groups of people, kind of in a positive way, engaging others than I was. And I picked up from that person too. But the worst case, again, goes back to kind of being ambitious the wrong way. And then you do things that are really not helpful. When people are ambitious the wrong way, one thing that you're tempted to do is, when I put my team together, let's make very certain that I'm the tallest, smartest, brightest on the team. Those people won't challenge me, right? And frankly, I've got job security because they won't get my job because they're not quite that good. Obviously, you won't get anywhere because the whole team is going to suck, and you're going to suck with the team together. And at some point, that's no fun, and it's also certainly not job security. But hiring mini-me's is just a bad idea, right? Hiring people and putting them in place where you can actually learn from every single one of them, it's just smart. It's good business, smart business. Team will be more successful. But that's some of this stuff on the right-hand side where you have to you should just be intuitive about it. You should use some like intuition, like what makes for a successful team. One thing, by the way, I just want to make sure I hit on that one. There's this Boy Scout saying, and that was never about Boy Scout, leave a place better than you found it. And to me, this is kind of one where I'm taking this very, very kind of micro versus macro. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when 5 decades from now, when you graduate from this earth, Jim, then somebody will say beautiful things about you at your funeral. And you left this place better than you found it because you did all these wonderful things along the way. You raised a beautiful family and had so much impact on others. When I say I want this on a micro way, every single day, like even in this interaction, or with the 50 emails that you're working through before and after, or with those 5 phone calls or those 4 meetings, every single one of those interactions, you actually have an opportunity to leave that place, that meeting, that interaction, those people in a better place than they were before they found themselves in that meeting, in that exchange, in that conversation. So that's another one. You can call that a tool. You can actually call that a passion, but and this one is probably not black or white. To me, it's hugely important. Can we take this leave a place better than you found it and make it very micro, like apply it to every single exchange you have during the day versus just a legacy over a lifetime where you left Earth after 85 great years better than you found it.
That's a great point. I mean, so when you talk about, some of the attributes from a leading perspective, and oftentimes I will give people an opportunity to select. I have a list of 20 different attributes that leaders have. What they think is the most important, and very few of them will select the one that is actually the most important, and that is that you want to see others succeed, even to the point if they surpass you. If you don't possess that attribute, don't even try to take a leader role. Forget it. I mean, not for you, right? And that's a hard realization for people to come to. Not everybody can be a leader. However, if you do have that attribute and you do commit, go all in because of what you're saying. I mean, it'll come back to you.
Right.
It'll catch up to you. One way or the okay. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the tools, the passion, and I'm looking at the work that you're have done and the work that you're still yet to do. And I start thinking to myself, what is a goal that Tom Schmitt has?
Well, I said one before, which is the overarching one just a couple of minutes ago, leaving a place better than I found it. Again, I've got this aspiration for every single exchange. Hopefully, when we're done with this exchange here and you go back to the rest of your day, hopefully in whatever small way, you're slightly better off than before this exchange. Perhaps you thought 1 or 2 little things that we discussed are intriguing, and you may use actually the same technique somewhere else. So for me, the one aspiration I have is, I'm obviously with Team Forward Air today. I'm also fortunate to serve on the board of a company called Ferguson. I clearly, when I hand off the baton to the next leader, I want to make very, very certain I did everything possible to leave this place better than I found it. And so that to me is a lifetime aspiration. It's a daily aspiration. And it's certainly, when I look at stretches, significant stretches, for me to turn over this beautiful little American jewel called Forward Air to the next leader, I want to make sure I leave it better than I found it.
And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best. All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the Hump Day Hoedown. Okay, Tom, the Hump Day Hoedown is a part of our show where you give us good insights fast. So I'm going to ask you several questions, and your job is to give us robust, yet rapid responses that are going to help us move onward and upward faster. Tom Schmitt, are you ready to hoe down?
Absolutely.
All right. So what is holding you back from being an even better leader today?
I think I can still get better on the right-hand side of my brain. I still probably too often explain versus seek to understand. I probably, when we have one of our imperatives saying we communicate with 2 ears and 1 mouth, I think there's a bias, especially if you have been mainstream successful for a long time, to tell people kind of, well, I've got monopoly to wisdom here. Here's what you need to be doing versus listening. So I think listen more and then truly let it soak in before doing and acting, I think would be making me better.
And what is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Probably to follow my heart and then calibrate where that takes me with my head, but lead with the heart and then calibrate with the head. I listened to Casey Kasem's Top 40 as a teenager and always wanted to become part of this American dream and work and live here. And I was in the deep South in small town, southern Germany. My parents never left their hometown. And I listened to my heart. I wanted to somehow get here. I wanted to become part of this fabric and of this American dream and create my own version of it. And a lot of the moves along the way may not have been the rationally smartest moves, but I was following my heart. I did use my head a few times to calibrate whether that actually made sense or not, but the heart should go first.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
I do believe I'm truly well-intended. I do want people to be successful. I want organizations and teams to be successful. After initially being ambitious, perhaps for the wrong reason, which is being somewhat selfishly ambitious, I think I did find a way to turn this. So I do believe I'm well-intended.
And what would be one book you'd recommend to our Legion? And it could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Simple Solutions on our show notes page as well.
So that one doesn't qualify, I guess. I have to say, like, I always loved novels because I read so much business literature, and I'd be hard-pressed to pick one over the other. So I'm going to actually take a pass on that one. I'm going to tell you perhaps my favorite movie.
That's fine.
Which would be a $1 Million Baby, which I thought is a tremendous story, extremely well told with amazing actors that actually really turns on every single part of your left brain and your right brain at the same time.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other information by going to fastleader.net/Tom Smith, or just do a search for Tom Schmitt. Schmitt on your on a search bar. Okay, so now this is my last Hump Day Hold On question, Tom. Imagine you were given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back to the age of 25, but you know what? You can't take it all. You can only take one. So what skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you, and why?
Building a great team. I think every single time that I was successful and had a blast doing so, the team that was with me made me better, stretched me, and putting that team together was always job number one. And frankly, everything becomes easier. I'm a big fan of making things lighter, not harder for people. A great team kind of just gives you tailwind. So that's the one skill I would always take with me.
Tom, I had a great time chatting with you today. How does the Fast Leader Legion get in touch with you?
You can certainly always email me, tschmitt@forwardair.com. I will be responding because it's part of my job to leave this exchange, and you're reaching out to me, leaving you better. So I will always be responsive, tschmitt@forwardair.com. And Schmidt has 2 T's at the end.
Tom Schmitt, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom and helping us all get over the hump. Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.